this stuff we all know, right? We remember. Then we talked about Andy Grove. Andy Grove was chemistry, right? And then he joined Fairchild, and three of them became, I don't know if they're best friends, but they worked a lot together. So, okay, we're going to come to them a little bit later. So, Silicon Valley is what I wanted to talk. Everybody knows what Silicon Valley is? So, Silicon Valley is close to Bay Area. I spent some time over there. The main observation, right, is 1965. Because we started with 58 and we are slowly going forward. We started with World War. So, now today we are at 65. In 65, 95% of the chips, right? The motivation was, how were they able to sell more chips? Because even though they were expensive, military just took everything, right? So, they were for military and space applications, they were all consumed. So, then, Bob Noyce, he is, in my opinion, is equally a visionary in that sense, that what he realized is, I don't want to depend on military and space applications because they're very, very strict and, unique and very expensive. So what he said that, we need to produce chips for mass market, okay? Because the military part was very attractive because you could get lots of money, whatever you needed. So he kind of went against the grain because everybody was very happy with, selling chips to military because they were getting a lot of money. So what he said is that, no, we will design for, mass market and commercial application and we will drop the price. Even if we don't make money, it's okay. But let's drop the price. And what that did is basically it enabled everyone to kind of use the chips, So this kind of, even though it was not a technology piece, right? You would think, इसमें technology कहाँ है? लेकिन उसका दिमाग अच्छा चल रहा था. Because it's very hard to think, right? If I'm selling something at $1 million, why would you want to sell it for $10, right? Right? But then he knew, if I start selling something at lower price, then people will start using it. They'll get addicted. So people get addicted and they want to use more, and then they can sell more, and then he makes more money, right? So that's the thing he realized very early on. So quite a genius in my opinion in that sense. About that time, I want to tell you about Gardon Moore. Everybody has heard about Gardon Moore? Yes? No? Anybody who has not? Okay. So there is something called Moore's Law, which I'm going to talk about. Basically Gardon Moore and Andy Grove and one more person, Bob Noyce, they were working together at Fairchild, and Gardon Moore was asked in 1965 to write for a December magazine, electronics magazine. I used to get this electronics magazine in India also. I remember, still remember. It's a beautiful magazine, colorful magazine, and it would have all the schematics, and for me it was very exciting to get that magazine. Anyway, so they asked him to write an article. So what he observed, I mean, you can see the number of points he had was 5 points, okay? And on the x-axis you have years, okay? And on the y-axis you have number of transistors in that particular, whatever the chip, most complex chips that is. And based on this information, he postulated a rule that number of components on the chip double every 12 months. Okay, that's the rule he came up with based on whatever he saw at that time. And that became known as a Moore's Law. Okay, and later on they changed it to 24 months. What was going on was cost per transistor was going down like a rock. And we are putting more transistors on a chip. Okay, so then what happens? There is a double amplification effect, and which is what we call as exponential. So exponential growth happened because of that. So Bob Noyce's rule was, well, let's drop the price, right? Many times they sold chips at a below cost, but they got everyone hooked, and then there was more demand and they were able to make money. Okay, so basically if you look at today, right, it's a nano dollars, nano for a transistor. Okay, that's what we are paying for now. And I had a chance to see Gardon Moore, and I'm kind of blessed because I got to see even Jack Kilby up close and personal. Had a chance to talk to him. But Gardon Moore, I got to see him just like a meeting we are doing right now, and he's a very witty person. He comes in as a very quiet demeanor, but when he talks, he's very, very witty. So everyone at that time, this was in the 21, if I remember, conference 2021. at the conference, there was a claim that, oh, Moore's law is extinct. Moore's law is extinct, right? So then he kind of explained what was going on. I mean, lots of slides he showed. And then, the key thing he said was this: no exponential is forever, right? Because then it would explode, everything will explode. But then he said forever can be delayed as much as possible. So I still remember that statement he made in that comment, and the entire crowd was laughing when he said that. So that became like the landmark saying for me. So the Gardon Moore, you should remember, every year, what happens? Every 2 years now, double. So let's look at the Moore's law now. Okay, so what we have here is, I picked up something from all the documentation on the x-axis. If you see, I have 2020 as the last data point I have. And on the y-axis is number of transistors. 50 billion is the last data point. And on the right side is 2020. And I think the last one is some AMD processor, right? Okay, all right. And then there are a lot of Apple processors also coming into play. So amazing, right? So it still looks the same every year. That this exponential is continuing forever. The forever is getting delayed more and more. So the Olympic record for this, for 2024, is the NVIDIA B100 GPU. And unbelievable, right? 208 billion transistors. And this is done in TSMC's 4 nanometer. What does 4 nanometer mean? What is the process technology we have given you? 500 nanometers, 0.5 micron. That's 500 nanometers. And here it is 4 nanometers. Okay, so 100th of what you are using right now. Okay, is that cool? So the around the same time, right? Of course, we have to look at the world. Of course, India is going to come into play, but that's coming into play later on. So Soviet Silicon Valley, what was going on was that this transistor fever was happening in USSR also. So in USSR, what was going on was they had lots of technique, because they had Sputnik, way ahead of everybody else, right? So technology was very well developed there, and they realized that, hey, we are in trouble, we are falling behind, and so they would one of the person who was there was an exchange program between United States and Russia, not Russia, USSR at that time. So they would send people from back and forth, like we have exchange students going on, but then they would be very worried कि कहीं हमारा माल चुरा के तो लेके वापस नहीं जा रहा है ना. So that was the constant fear that Americans had. Interesting story is one of the engineers who was learning, he wanted to get autograph of Shockley on his book. There was a Russian translated book of Shockley available in over there, so he took the book. Of course, Shockley couldn't read in Russian, but he signed and he gave him a hard time. Hey, you haven't paid me royalty for this book, right? So that was the story going on as a concept. They were copying everything. Their mantra was copy everything. Okay, copy whatever is yours doing. Let's reverse engineer copy. So Nikita Khrushchev, he was one of the administration people. He was extremely competitive, right? There are some people who are extremely nationalistic, competitive. So he just wanted to beat US in this field, right? So then they were doing sending lots of spies to US, bring stuff back in, and copy and all that stuff. So one of the guys called Shokin, interestingly, I mean, the amount of information about Russia that's available online, because I'm putting this together based on what is available on the web. The pictures, nothing is available from Russia. So I have to really dig through a lot of websites to find even because pictures, when you see, it gets interesting, right? So the person I wanted to look for was Shokin. So Shokin was vice premier, so I could find his picture. So he convinced Khrushchev at that time that, hey, we really need to get our act together in Russia, otherwise we are going to fall behind, and specifically where? In the military applications. So what he said is that, hey, we need to have this entire city dedicated to semiconductors. That's what and let's get everybody staying there, and day and night you should work, type of thing, right? And then the name of the city is interestingly called Zelenograd. So Zelenograd looks like this, okay? And they really put a lot of effort. So it was all reverse engineering. Yahan se leke aao, open karke dekho, and then We will try to replicate it. Now, Russians are very good at reverse engineering big things. Like if you have a nuclear thing, these are all big equipment. Those are very easy to, but then here it wasn't just the small size of the thing. There was a process which, Maurice Chang was doing. Itna pressure रहना चाहिए, itna temperature रहना चाहिए, तो ही चलेगा. The key was not to make something, but to make it practical and repeatable. So they really fell behind, on this. So basically, reliability is important when it comes to chips, and they were not able to get there. So it hurt Soviet innovation quite a lot, this strategy of copying it. And you will see a different strategy in a different nation, and you will appreciate what I'm trying to say here, right? So they really fell behind compared to US because of this strategy. Let's copy and let's reverse engineer, right? Okay. So now comes Japan. So in Japan, you remember Akio Morita, right? So Akio Morita was a physicist and he was a tinkerer. He inherited, his father was a sake distillery. So very expensive drink or alcohol, right? So it's a rice made from rice. So that's what his father wanted him. He was a 16th generation, sake distiller. Like imagine, you were part of Kingfisher and suddenly Vijay Mallya said like, I don't want to sell beer anymore. I want to get into semiconductors, right? I mean, imagine how awkward that would be, right? So Akio Morita, interesting thing about Akio is, he was a physicist, tinkerer, and that really helped him. Because when the draft to get into World War II came, you remember the first time I told you the story, right? He kind of avoided the military. He didn't want to get killed. And he was able to get into the labs, research labs and things like that, right? So he was basically, he founded Sony. Sony is a company. And the word Sony comes from Sonus. Sonus means a sound. And then American Sony. So then dono ka combination mina ke, then he said Sony is a excellent name for the company. And their first product was actually a rice cooker and failed miserably. So he started with Masaru Ibuka-san. I used to, anybody from Japan, you call them san, right? So Morita-san started Sony with Ibuka-san, and the company was in 1946, so just after World War ended. Now the Japanese strategy was a little bit different. They just wanted to license everything. Now what helped them was United States was very afraid that what they thought was a weaker Japan is worse than a stronger Japan. You would think that they bombed Japan, right, with atomic weapons and things like that. Then the thought process of the top politicians at that time was that let's keep Japan strong, but strong enough. Okay, so there was a lot of technical know-how which was going back and forth between the two sides. And so there was an excellent symbiosis between US and Japan. So US was designing chips. Morita-san was very good at one thing, which is how do I make a product? You give me the pieces, parts, and I will make a product. So he took the transistor, he took everything, and you can see here, this was their first transistor. This is a really tiny transistor, which at that time was totally unheard of. I had a transistor, not transistor, I should call a radio. It was like this bulky, it had all these vacuum tubes I showed you, right? And here is a transistor which fits on a palm of hand. And interestingly, the story is that the Japanese Prime Minister gave this transistor to Charles de Gaulle, who was a French president at that time, after whom the airport is named in Paris, right? So, so he actually gave this as a gift to him, a tiny transistor. So it was considered very revolutionary at that time. And so they really excelled taking parts from US and then manufacturing a product. That was they were good at. So Morita-san basically take everything, consume the parts, transistors from Japan, and make these things. So Sharp also came around this. Does everybody know company Sharp from Japan? Right? You see TVs nowadays and the display technologies from them. So they were producing this was the first calculator. Now you can imagine a calculator, but this was like hot cake at that time. And this was again the same idea. You take components from US and you make a calculator. And calculator was big deal because people were fascinated. Like I can just punch and I can get an answer, right? So the products is what was going on at that time. They kind of Morita-san really understood that that we got to make products which are killer. Okay, and his saying was that consumers don't know what they want. I know what you want. Like, we know what you want. And they would design things because nobody at that time thought that a transistor could fit into your pocket. So that was his main thing. I still remember during hostel days, we had the first Walkman. One of my my wingmates, he had one, and it was just fascinating that you could actually put a cassette player, and it was almost same size as a cassette. So it's a beautiful piece. And everybody wanted one, right? And you could not imagine that such a big cassette player can be fit into a small piece like this. So that was their main thing. So US was very good at high technology. How do I make transistor? How do I make complex chips like Moore's law, whatever they're showing? But Japan was very good at taking this stuff and then make things with it. Okay. Now a lot of people dabbled into this. The Texas Instruments, they tried to build a calculator, but they gave up. Right? So they tried to replicate the Japanese manufacturing efficiency. Nobody could do that. Nobody could do that in US. So basically, just like US was good at manufacturing high-end chips, Japan was very good at producing products which were high-end using the chips which were done in US. So the story is interesting. The US basically allowed the Japanese take advanced technology, and then what they were worried was that, hey, if I don't give them technology, they are smart people. They'll go to either China or Russia. That was their worry at that time. So they said, nahi, humse hi le lo. At least hamara maal to bikega, right? That's what they were doing. So they were selling all the semiconductors to them, and they were making products. And Japan was selling everything. So they were the electronics hub, even though they were not making chips. Now, interesting story is that from people from Texas Instruments, they realized that if they're so good at this, why not get chips done over there? Now, at that point, it was considered awesome, right? But now you see the impact of it. So the Japanese people, they didn't want anything to do with it because they had administration, they were very nationalistic. इनके साथ काम नहीं करना है, हमें ऐसे ऐसे चल रहा था. So Morita-san, he was really smart. So what he said is that, you give me the technology, you start the technology, I'll take care of your administration, sabke licensing वगैरह. They also had red tape in terms of licensing. So they actually met in a very remote hotel, which was nobody would notice them. They had name change, everything. And so Morita-san and the people from TI met in that place, and they got into this agreement where TI will provide the technology and Sony would make sure that all the clearances that they need for that technology are taken care of, literally. And then they learn in that process. How do you do all these things, right? So that's kind of an interesting story from Japan. So the vision of the Prime Minister, Ikeda-san, was that the amount of money a Japanese person, normal Japanese person, makes should double during my tenure. So with all this semiconductor innovation, that's exactly what they were able to achieve before even his tenure actually was done. So all these stories that I'm telling you, right? The reference is these two books. One is called Chip Wars, very interesting book. And if you look at his blog and he talks very well. I'm not even 0.01% of what he does, right? So, but I'm learning. I learned a lot from this book. So I'm just giving you the reference. And then there is another book. All this stuff is going to come in the future by Pranay Kotasthane and Abhiram Manchi. So this is about India. So the when chips are down. So this was written during the COVID times. So all these pieces will come together. I just wanted to make it interesting for you to visually appreciate the history. All right. Thank you so much.